She looked me right in the eye and said it like it didn't mean a thing. "Dad, you're a burden now. You can't stay here anymore." Just like that. No tears, no hesitation. My own daughter. The little girl I used to carry on my shoulders when she got tired walking home from school. Now standing there with her arms crossed, sending me out like I was some old piece of furniture. I stood in that doorway holding nothing but my old leather bag, same one I'd used since my days driving the school bus. It had a couple of shirts, some socks, my shaving kit, and something else. Something she didn't know about. I had a secret inside me that would change everything. A secret I'd kept quiet for years. And one day, she'd end up begging me for forgiveness because of it. My name's Walter Thompson. Folks back home always called me Walt. I was born in a small town outside Wichita, Kansas. Grew up with dust in my boots and calluses on my hands. My daddy was a mechanic. My mama worked as a seamstress. I spent most of my life behind the wheel. 35 years driving a school bus. Every morning before the sun came up, I'd be out there checking the engine, wiping down the windshield, making sure all them kids got to school safe and back home again. That bus was more than a job. It was my pride. I ain't a rich man. Never was. But I made my living honest. I raised my family honest. Or at least, I thought I did. I had one daughter. Her name's Rachel. Smart girl, always was. Graduated college, married a man from the city, moved into a big house with white columns out front. I was proud of her, truly. I never wanted to be in the way, so I stayed in my old place as long as I could. But after my heart surgery last year, well, things got harder. Doctor said I shouldn't be living alone anymore. So Rachel said, "Come stay with us, Dad. It's just temporary." I believed her. I packed my bag, locked up my little house, and moved in. I didn't know temporary meant until the day she got tired of seeing me around. That Tuesday morning, everything changed. I just finished my coffee. Black, no sugar. Always liked it that way. Rachel came into the kitchen with her husband right behind her. Both of them with that look people get when they're about to say something you won't like. And she just said it. "Dad, we talked about it. You're a burden now. You can't stay here anymore." Her husband didn't say a word, just stood there holding his coffee mug, eyes down. I looked at my daughter and I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just nodded, picked up my bag, zipped my jacket, and walked to the door. But like I said, I wasn't as helpless as they thought. I wasn't as forgotten as they figured I'd be. See, all those years driving that bus, putting money away bit by bit, I'd saved up something they didn't know about. Investments, small ones, real estate, little retirement funds nobody paid attention to. And there was something else too. A document in my bag, folded up inside an envelope. I'll get to that part later. For now, just know I walked out of my daughter's house without looking back. I walked slow, steady. My old knees hurt, sure, but my head was clear. I ended up sitting on the bench at the bus stop down the street. Cold wind blowing, my breath coming out in little white clouds. I sat there thinking about everything. About Rachel when she was a baby. About my wife, God rest her soul. About all the things I'd done right and all the things I might have done wrong. That's life, isn't it? You raise 'em, you teach 'em, you hope they turn out better than you. But sometimes they forget who taught them everything in the first place. As I sat there, I pulled that envelope out of my bag, looked at it for a long while. Plain white paper. Nothing fancy. But inside was something that would turn this whole thing upside down. I didn't open it. Not yet. I just held it in my hands, feeling the weight of it, like holding a piece of my own history. You might be wondering what was in that envelope, why I never told Rachel about it, why I kept it hidden all these years. Well, like I said, life's funny that way. Sometimes keeping quiet is the only way to keep your dignity. Sometimes the best revenge is patience. Now, I don't know who's out there listening right now. Maybe you've been through something like this yourself. Maybe you know what it feels like to be pushed aside, treated like you don't matter anymore. If you do, stay with me till the end of this story. And if it reminds you of anything, if you've got a story like mine, leave a comment. Let me know where you're watching from. I'd really like to hear your story too, because as for me, that morning wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The wind cut through my jacket as I sat there at that bus stop bench, fingers numb, bag resting on my lap. I didn't know where I was going to go next. It wasn't like I had a whole list of places lined up. At my age, folks don't exactly have a plan B ready, but I wasn't about to call anyone, especially not Rachel. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to let her think I needed her mercy. That's something I learned a long time ago. Your old man's pride may be all he's got left, but it's worth holding on to. Now, I wasn't always the kind of man to sit quietly with my thoughts. Back when my wife Mary was alive, she used to say I was a talker. Always had a story ready, always had some joke from the kids on the bus or some memory from the farm. But after she passed, after Mary was gone, the house just got real quiet. Too quiet. Rachel said I should get out more. Join one of those senior clubs, Dad. I never did. Never felt like it was my kind of place, sitting in a bingo hall with strangers. I was happy with my little routines, fixing things in the garage, sitting on the porch, reading the newspaper. That was enough for me. That morning, though, sitting out there, I realized how small my world had gotten, and I wondered if maybe that's why Rachel thought I was a burden. Maybe I'd let myself fade into the background too much. Or maybe she'd just forgotten what it meant to take care of the people who took care of her. Either way, I wasn't about to let it eat me up. I was cold, sure, but my mind was clear. I'd find my own way. So I stood up, bag in hand, and I started walking. No idea where I was headed exactly. Just putting one foot in front of the other. That's what an old bus driver does, I guess. Keeps moving until he finds the next stop. I walked past the grocery store where I used to take Rachel when she was little. Funny thing about memories. They sneak up on you when you least expect it. I could almost see her there. Maybe 5 years old, holding my hand, asking for a candy bar by the checkout line. Back then, I'd always say no, but sometimes I'd slip one into the bag anyway when she wasn't looking. After a while, my legs started giving me that familiar ache, that deep kind of pain that lets you know you've been on 'em too long. I found myself outside a small diner, one of those old places with the neon coffee cup sign buzzing in the window. I hadn't eaten yet, so I figured why not. Inside, it was warm. Smelled like bacon grease and old coffee pots. The kind of smell that reminds you you're still alive. I sat down at the counter, set my bag on the floor beside me. The waitress came over, maybe mid-50s, hair up in a bun, name tag that said, Gloria. "You look like you could use some coffee," she said, pouring me a cup before I even asked. I smiled, nodded. Appreciate it. Gloria didn't ask a bunch of questions. She just kept moving, refilling folks' cups, wiping down the counter. And for that, I was grateful. I wasn't in the mood to tell my whole life story just yet. But sitting there, sipping that hot coffee, I felt something settle inside me. Like maybe things were going to be okay after all. That envelope was still in my bag, by the way. I hadn't opened it yet, and I wasn't ready to. Not there. Not in front of strangers. That was for later. Then, while I was finishing my coffee, I heard the bell over the door ring. I turned, and who do you think walked in? Someone I hadn't seen in over 20 years. A man I never expected to cross paths with again. And the look on his face when he saw me, well, that's a story for another time. The moment I saw him step through that diner door, it felt like the air in the whole place changed. His name was Frank Delaney. Back in the day, folks used to call him Big Frank. Not because of his size, but because of his voice. Frank had been my neighbor almost 30 years ago, back when Mary and I still lived out near the edge of town. He'd been the kind of man that always had a tool in one hand and a cigarette in the other. We weren't exactly best friends, but we shared enough barbecues and Sunday afternoons fixing up old cars in the driveway. And then, one day, he just disappeared. Moved away, nobody really knew why. I hadn't seen Frank since before Mary passed. That's over 2 decades of silence. So when he walked in wearing that same worn-out denim jacket, same squint in his eyes, I wasn't sure if it was real or just my memory playing tricks on me. Frank spotted me almost instantly. His mouth opened a little like he'd just seen a ghost. I set my coffee cup down real slow, cleared my throat and said, "Well, I'll be damned. Frank Delaney." He gave me that sideways grin I remembered so well and walked right up to where I was sitting. Walt Thompson. Man, it's been a long time. We shook hands, his grip still firm like back then. Didn't expect to find you here, Frank said, pulling up a stool beside me. I shrugged. Wasn't exactly the plan. We talked for a while, nothing too deep at first. Just two old men catching up over bad coffee and even worse weather. But eventually Frank leaned in closer and said, "You all right, Walt? You look like a man carrying more than just that bag." And right then, I almost told him everything. About Rachel. About what she said. About being left out in the cold. But something held me back. Maybe pride. Maybe just habit. Instead, I just nodded and said, "Life's funny sometimes, Frank. That's all." Frank didn't push. He just patted my shoulder once and said, "Ain't that the truth?" Before he left, he scribbled his number down on a napkin. "In case you need something. I'm back in town now, fixing up my brother's old shop down by the railroad tracks." I folded the napkin, slipped it into my pocket next to that envelope. After Frank walked out, I sat there a while longer, watching the snow start to fall outside the diner window. And I kept thinking about that envelope, about how many years it had been since I sealed it up, about why I'd kept it hidden. See, back when Mary was sick, before the cancer really took hold, I made some choices. Quiet choices. Choices Rachel never knew about. I sold off a piece of land we had outside of town, signed some papers, put things in motion so that if anything ever happened to me, certain things would fall into place automatically. That envelope wasn't just a piece of paper. It held all the details. Account numbers, deeds, letters. A lifetime tucked into one small package. And Rachel, she didn't know any of it. She thought I was just some old man sitting around waiting to be taken care of. But I wasn't. I paid for my own life, all the way through. And I'd pay for my own end too. By the time I stood up to leave that diner, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going back to Rachel's, not ever. Not for holidays, not for birthdays. I'd figure things out on my own. I stepped outside into the cold, bag in hand, napkin in my pocket, an envelope still safe inside. And as I walked down that empty street, snow falling quiet like ashes, I realized something else. It wasn't just Rachel who'd forgotten me. It was the whole world. But that was about to change. The snow kept falling as I walked, each flake swirling through the air like it had somewhere important to be. It covered the sidewalks, the cars parked along the street, even the old wooden benches outside the diner I'd just left. I didn't really feel the cold anymore. I think there's a point when your body just goes numb and your mind takes over. I wasn't walking toward anywhere specific, just moving, one slow step at a time, like an old engine running on habit more than gas. That's how it is when life pulls the rug out from under you. You don't stop, you just keep moving until something makes you stop. And in my case, that something turned out to be the old public library on Main Street. I hadn't set foot in that building for what must have been 10 years, maybe more. But when I saw it sitting there, same faded sign hanging crooked above the door, same chipping paint on the window frames, I felt something I hadn't felt all morning. A pull. Not a loud one. A quiet, gentle tug inside my chest. Like the place was reminding me it still existed. I pushed open the door, heard the bell chime like it always had, and stepped inside. The warmth hit me first. Then the smell. Old paper, polished wood, dust that nobody bothered to wipe because it was part of the place by now. There were only a few folks in there, mostly older people like me, sitting at tables reading or just looking out the windows like they had nowhere else to be. I didn't recognize the woman behind the counter. Younger than me by a good 30 years, hair pulled back, glasses on her nose. She gave me a small, polite smile, but she didn't say anything right away, which I appreciated. I wasn't in the mood for questions. I made my way toward the back, to the history section. Mary used to love this part of the library. History books, biographies, stories about people long gone but not forgotten. I wasn't much for that kind of reading, always preferred a good Western or a crime novel. But I'd sit with her while she flipped through those heavy hardcovers, letting her read out bits she found interesting. I could hear her voice in my head right then. Clear as day. That warm, steady tone she had when she wasn't mad at me for leaving my boots by the door or forgetting to take out the trash. I ran my hand along the spines of the books, not looking for anything in particular. Just feeling them there. Solid. Real. I pulled out a chair at one of the tables and sat down, setting my old leather bag on the floor beside me. My knees creaked as I lowered myself down, but I didn't care. I reached into the bag and pulled out that envelope. The one Rachel didn't know about. The one with the secret I'd been carrying longer than she'd been alive. It was a plain envelope. No writing on it. No fancy seals. But it felt heavier than anything else I owned. I turned it over in my hands, fingers tracing the edges. Thought about opening it right there, just to look at the papers inside again. But I didn't. I already knew what was in there. Account numbers, deeds. A letter Mary wrote before she passed, the one Rachel never knew existed. I wasn't ready to look at it yet. Not today. I sat there holding it for I don't know how long. People came and went. The librarian walked past me once or twice, shelving books, but she didn't say anything. Just let me be. That kind of silence is rare these days. The kind that doesn't feel heavy or awkward. Just quiet. Like the world pausing for a breath. Eventually, though, she did sit down across from me. I looked up, and there she was, pulling out the chair like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You okay, sir?" she asked, voice soft but clear. I gave her a slow nod. "Yeah, just resting my legs. Haven't been in here in a while." She smiled. "Library's always here for folks needing a quiet place." I liked that. Simple words, but they meant something. I didn't tell her why I was really there. Didn't tell her about Rachel or the house or the words that still rang in my ears. "You're a burden now." Some things don't need to be said out loud. At least not to strangers. After a while, she stood and went back to her desk. I stayed put for a little longer, envelope still in hand. And as I sat there, I thought about Mary again. About how she always said, "Walter, don't let bitterness take hold. It'll eat you from the inside out." I wasn't bitter. Not yet. But I was close. When I finally stood up, I felt a little steadier. Like maybe sitting in that library had reminded me I wasn't invisible in this world. I slipped the envelope back into my bag, zipped it shut, and headed for the door. The bell chimed as I stepped back out into the snow, and this time, it didn't feel as cold. Maybe the air had warmed up a little, or maybe I had. Either way, I knew where I was going next. The old bus depot down by the edge of town. Back when I was driving, that depot was like my second home. Grease stains on the floors, engine parts scattered around, men sitting on overturned crates drinking black coffee out of styrofoam cups. It had been years since I'd been there, but I figured if I was going to start figuring things out again, that was as good a place as any. Walking toward it, I passed the same row of shops I'd driven past 1,000 times. The old hardware, the pawn shop with the blinking neon sign that hadn't worked right since the 90s. And as I walked, I kept thinking about Rachel, wondering if she'd noticed I was gone yet, if maybe there was some part of her, deep down, past all the pride and the busy city life, that felt a little hollow, knowing her father wasn't under her roof anymore. I didn't know. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I cared, at least not in that moment. By the time I reached the depot, the sky had started to turn that gray color it gets before dark in the winter. I pushed open the big metal door, same creaky hinges as always, and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Oil, rubber, old coffee. Familiar. Comforting, in a strange way. And that's when I saw him. Sitting at the back table, same spot he always used to take during breaks. A man I hadn't seen in years. But not Frank this time. No. This was someone else entirely. And the look he gave me when our eyes met, well, let's just say it wasn't the kind of look you give an old friend. That's where I'll leave it for now. His name was Eddie Moore. I hadn't laid eyes on Eddie since the day I retired, and believe me, I'd hoped never to see him again. Eddie wasn't like Frank. Where Frank was the kind of man you could trust with your tools or your word, Eddie was cut from a rougher cloth. Back when I was still driving the school bus, Eddie worked maintenance at the depot. Always had a cigarette hanging from his mouth. Always had some bet going. Cards, sports, horses, didn't matter. If there was money involved, Eddie had a hand in it. And more than once, folks whispered that Eddie wasn't above skimming a little off the top. I stood there by the depot door, snow still dusting my shoulders, and Eddie just stared at me like I was some kind of ghost. His hair had gone grayer than mine, and he looked thinner, smaller than I remembered. But his eyes, those cold, sharp eyes, hadn't changed a bit. "Well," he said finally, flicking ashes into a chipped coffee mug, "if it ain't Walt Thompson. Thought you were dead." "Not yet," I said, walking in slow, boots echoing on the concrete floor. Eddie leaned back in his chair, giving me a long look. "Ain't seen you round here in what, 15, 20 years? "More like 25, I answered. He snorted, shaking his head. "Didn't figure you'd be back, not after what happened." I didn't bite. I just pulled up a stool across from him, set my bag down by my feet. My knees creaked as I sat, same as always. "What happened?" I said evenly. "Is none of your business." Eddie's mouth twitched into a smile. "Still carrying that chip on your shoulder, huh?" I didn't bother answering. I just sat there, feeling the weight of that envelope in my bag like it was burning a hole through the leather. For a minute, we didn't say anything. Just sat there in silence, the hum of old fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Then Eddie leaned in, lowering his voice like we were in on some kind of secret. "Word is you've been staying with your daughter, or you were." I felt my jaw tighten. Small towns don't change. News gets around. Even when you think nobody's looking, somebody's always looking. "Not anymore," I said quietly. Eddie gave a slow nod, eyes flicking toward my bag like he could sense what I was carrying. "You need a place to stay, Walt?" he asked, voice low. "Got a room in the back here. Ain't fancy, but it's warm." I didn't trust Eddie, not back then, not now. But standing there with nowhere else to go, I had to admit, warm sounded better than cold. "I'll think about it," I said. Eddie shrugged like it didn't matter to him either way. "Suit yourself." But as I stood up to leave, he said one more thing that stuck with me. "Whatever it is you're holding on to, Walt, it ain't gonna bring her back." At first, I wasn't sure what he meant. Mary? Rachel? But as I stepped back out into the night, cold air hitting my face like a slap, I realized exactly who he was talking about. Mary. My wife. Eddie always had a way of getting under people's skin, and that night, he'd gotten under mine. I walked away from the depot, boots crunching fresh snow. The whole town felt quiet. Streets empty, houses dark, just a few porch lights glowing like tiny stars. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just walking to clear my head. I was walking toward a decision, toward the moment I'd finally open that envelope and face everything I'd been carrying all these years. That night, as I kept walking, everything around me felt quieter than usual, like the whole town had gone to sleep while I was still wide awake, carrying the kind of thoughts that don't let a man rest. The streets were empty, the sky low and heavy, like it might snow again, but I wasn't cold anymore. Or maybe I just didn't care. I wasn't thinking about the weather, or about how my knees ached with every step. My mind was fixed on one thing, that envelope sitting inside my old leather bag, the one I'd carried with me for so long it had become like a part of my own skin. I didn't head back to the depot, and I sure wasn't going to call Rachel. I wasn't in the mood to hear her voice, not tonight, not after everything she said. Instead, I kept walking until I reached the edge of town. Out there by the old train tracks, there was still a bench, rusted and worn, half covered in frost. It hadn't been replaced in all these years. Same bench where I used to sit waiting for Mary when she'd finish her shopping downtown. I sat down slow, feeling the cold metal through my coat. I set the bag on my lap and unzipped it, pulling out that envelope like it weighed more than it should for something so small. For a while, I just held it in my hands, turning it over, running my fingers along the edges. I already knew what was inside, but there was something about seeing it again after so long that made my heart beat a little different. I thought about the first time I'd sealed it. Mary had still been alive back then. She wasn't doing too well already. Cancer was in her lungs, the kind that don't give a man much time. We'd talked late into the night, sitting at the kitchen table, and she'd made me promise, no matter what happened, I'd take care of things quietly, in my own way. That was always Mary's way. No fuss, no drama, just quiet dignity. That's why I'd made sure to put everything in order. Life insurance, property deeds, savings accounts nobody knew about. Even a letter Mary had written to Rachel before she passed. Rachel never saw that letter. I never gave it to her. And looking back now, I wasn't sure if I ever would. I opened the envelope slowly, careful not to tear it. Inside, everything was still there, just as I'd left it. Neatly folded papers, typed and handwritten. Account numbers, titles, letters. I pulled out Mary's letter first. Her handwriting was still as steady as I remembered it. Neat, round letters on lined paper. I didn't read it right away. I just held it, feeling the weight of her words in my hand. It made me think about the kind of woman she'd been. Strong, patient. The kind of person who never said much, but always meant what she said. She'd been the glue holding me and Rachel together for years. And when she was gone, well, it didn't take long for things to fall apart. I sat there for a long time, just looking through the papers, reading over the details like I was seeing them for the first time. The savings accounts weren't huge, but they were enough. Enough to live on without needing to lean on anybody. Enough to make sure I wasn't anybody's burden. And the deeds. 2 small properties outside town, both paid off, both in my name. Rachel didn't know about either of them. I'd bought them quiet over the years, using extra money I'd saved from the bus driving job. And then there was the life insurance policy, a decent sum Mary had left behind, never claimed by Rachel because she never knew it existed. I sat back against the bench, eyes closed, envelope resting on my lap. And I felt it clear as day. This wasn't just paper. It was my last piece of control over a world that felt like it had moved on without me. I wasn't rich, not by a long shot, but I wasn't helpless either. Rachel thought she'd washed her hands of me, thought she'd kicked me out with nothing but an old bag and nowhere to go. But she didn't know half the story. That thought stayed with me as I sat there, watching my breath rise in little clouds against the cold night air. I thought about what Mary would say if she were sitting there beside me. Probably something quiet like, "It's time, Walter." She'd always known when it was time to move on, time to stop holding things in. And maybe she was right. Maybe it really was time. Time to stop carrying this weight all by myself. But I wasn't ready to hand those papers over just yet. Not to Rachel, not to anybody. So I put everything back in the envelope, folded it neat, zipped up my bag again. And as I stood up from that bench, knees creaking, snow crunching under my boots, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Steadiness. Like no matter how cold the night got, or how far I still had to walk, I wasn't walking empty-handed anymore. I had my own kind of power now. Quiet power. The kind that doesn't shout or make a scene. The kind that waits. And that night, I decided one thing for sure. Next time I saw Rachel, I wouldn't go asking for a place to stay. I wouldn't be looking for kindness or apologies. I'd go looking her in the eye and show her exactly what she never knew her old man was hiding all along. By morning, the snow had stopped falling, but the cold stayed sharp in the air. I woke up sitting on that same bench near the old tracks, leather bag still on my lap, envelope safely zipped inside. My back ached something fierce, legs stiff from sitting out in the cold all night. But I didn't complain. Not out loud, not even in my own head. Pain like that, it reminds you you're still alive. I stretched my arms slow, shook the frost off my jacket, and looked up at the sky. It was that pale kind of blue Kansas gets in winter, cloudless, washed out like someone had drained all the color from it overnight. And right then, for the first time in days, I knew exactly where I was going. I wasn't heading to a shelter, wasn't looking for a cheap motel or knocking on old neighbors' doors. I had something else in mind. One of those properties I mentioned, the ones Rachel didn't know about. I'd bought a little house out near Cedar Grove, maybe 15 miles outside of town, years ago when I was still driving the school bus. It wasn't much. 2 rooms, old wood stove, tin roof. But it was mine. Paid in full, quiet, with no one there to tell me I didn't belong. Back then, I'd kept it as a kind of backup plan. Never really thought I'd need it. Funny how life works out. I set off walking down the service road, boots crunching over frozen dirt and patches of ice, hands shoved deep into my coat pockets. It was a long walk, but I didn't mind. Each step felt like it was pulling me farther away from Rachel's house, from all the things she said, from everything that had weighed me down for too long. The world felt wide open again. Empty, sure, but open. The road curved past old farms and bare fields. I passed a couple of folks along the way, mostly farmers in pickup trucks, giving me that slow nod people give strangers out here. Not a lot of words, just quiet recognition. That's something I always liked about Kansas. People don't crowd you unless you want them to. By the time I saw the outline of the house in the distance, small, white, a little beat up but standing solid, my legs were burning and my breath came in short clouds. But there it was. Still there. Still mine. I stepped up onto the porch, keys in hand. The lock was stiff from the cold, but it turned just fine. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It smelled like dust and old wood. Sunlight poured in through the windows, lighting up dust motes floating in the air. I dropped my bag on the floor and just stood there for a minute, looking around. The kitchen table was still there, same spot I'd left it. A folded-up chair leaned against the wall. The stove in the corner had a stack of wood beside it, dry and ready. I knelt down slow, knees popping, and lit the fire. Soon enough, that familiar crackle filled the room, warmth creeping back into my bones. I sat down at the table, envelope in hand again, and just stared at it, thinking about what came next. I wasn't a man who made big plans, never had been. But now I had a choice to make. I could stay hidden here, quiet, let Rachel keep thinking whatever she wanted about me. Or I could let her see me again. Not as the old man she shoved out the door, but as the man who never needed her in the first place. The more I thought about it, the clearer it got. I wasn't the type to disappear and leave things unfinished. Mary wouldn't have wanted that either. And there was still that letter, the one she'd written. It wasn't mine to keep forever. I pulled it out, unfolded it slow, and read it again. Mary's words were simple, steady. No bitterness, no anger. Just truth. She wrote about love, about forgiveness, about how family isn't about what people give you. It's about what you carry for them, even when they don't deserve it. I sat there a long time, staring at those words, thinking about Rachel as a little girl. Her sitting in my lap while I read her stories. Her first bike ride. The first time she called me old man and actually meant it as a joke. And then, all the years between now and then. How we'd both let things slip away. I don't know how long I sat like that before I heard the sound of tires on gravel outside. Slow, careful. I stood up, heart beating a little faster now, stepped to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see. It was a black SUV, newer model, city plates. And when the door opened, my stomach tightened. It was Rachel. She stepped out, bundled up in a long coat, looking smaller somehow. Her face was tight, eyes scanning the house like she wasn't sure what she'd find inside. For a second, I thought about not opening the door, just letting her stand out there, wondering. Let her feel for 1 minute what it was like to be on the outside. But that wasn't me, wasn't who Mary raised me to be. So I opened the door. Rachel's eyes met mine, and for a moment, neither of us said a word. That's where I'll stop for now. Rachel stood there on the porch, hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, looking smaller than I remembered, like the weight of everything she'd said and done had finally settled on her shoulders. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes red like she hadn't slept all night. And for a long moment, we both just stared at each other in silence, neither one ready to say the first word. I watched her mouth open, then close again, like she wasn't sure how to start. Finally, I leaned against the door frame, my hand resting lightly on the wood, and I said it as plain as I could. Didn't expect to see you here. My voice came out steady, calm, maybe too calm for a man facing the daughter who'd thrown him out just days before. Rachel swallowed hard, glancing down at the porch floorboards before lifting her gaze back to mine. I had to come, she said quietly, voice barely carrying over the cold wind blowing between us. I couldn't just leave things like that. I didn't answer right away. I didn't move either. I wanted her to feel that pause, wanted her to know this wasn't something that could be fixed with a single visit or a couple of soft words, but I wasn't going to slam the door in her face either. That wasn't who I was. After another moment, I stepped aside, holding the door open just enough. "You gonna stand out there all morning?" I asked. Rachel gave a slow nod, almost like she wasn't sure if she deserved to come inside. But she stepped forward anyway, boots crunching against the wood, and crossed the threshold. I closed the door behind her, shutting out the cold and the rest of the world for a moment. Inside, the house was warm from the fire I'd built earlier. Rachel looked around slowly, taking it all in, the old stove, the wooden table, the dust on the shelves. I watched her face as she realized just how long I'd been keeping this place a secret. Her eyes lingered on my bag resting by the chair, and then flicked toward the envelope on the table, still there where I'd left it. Her mouth opened again like she wanted to ask about it, but she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she just said, "I didn't know you had this place." I pulled out a chair for myself, sitting down slow, feeling every bit of the years in my knees and back. "Lot of things you didn't know," I said evenly. "You didn't exactly ask." Rachel pulled her coat off, laying it over the back of a chair, and sat down across from me. Her hands rested on the table, fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. She looked like a woman carrying more weight than she knew what to do with, and I waited. I wasn't about to make it easy for her. If she came all this way, she was going to have to say it herself. "I'm sorry," she said finally, voice breaking just a little. "For what I said, for how I treated you. I don't have an excuse. I was stressed, I was overwhelmed, but that doesn't make it right." I watched her as she spoke, listened to every word, but I kept my face steady. No anger, no forgiveness, just quiet. When she finished, I let a few seconds pass before I answered. "Took you long enough," I said softly. Rachel looked down at her hands, nodding slowly like she'd been expecting that. I leaned back in my chair, glancing toward the fire. "You know, your mother always said there'd come a day when we'd find ourselves sitting across from each other like this, after some kind of storm." Rachel's eyes flicked up to mine, surprised. "She did?" I nodded. "Mary knew both of us too well. Said we were too stubborn for our own good." That made Rachel let out a soft laugh. Not a happy one, more like the kind that comes when you realize just how far things have gotten off track. For a while, neither of us said anything else. We just sat there, letting the silence settle. But I could see Rachel's eyes keep drifting toward that envelope, and finally she couldn't hold it in anymore. "Dad, what's that?" she asked, voice careful. I didn't answer right away. I reached out slow, sliding the envelope toward me, resting my hand on top of it like I was protecting something fragile. "This," I said quietly, "is everything you thought I didn't have." Rachel's brow furrowed in confusion. I could see her trying to piece it together, her mind running through every possibility. "I don't understand," she said. I tapped my fingers lightly against the paper. "Bank accounts, property deeds, life insurance policies. Things I put away a long time ago so I wouldn't have to depend on anybody, especially not my daughter." Her face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "You thought I was a burden," I continued, my voice steady as stone. "You thought I came to live with you because I needed something from you. But I didn't. I never did." Rachel shook her head slowly, eyes wide, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. I let out a slow breath, leaning back in my chair. "Because it wasn't your business, and because I wanted to see who you were when you thought I had nothing." That last sentence hung in the air between us, heavier than any silence. Rachel looked like she'd been slapped. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She just sat there, shoulders hunched forward, staring at her hands like they were strangers. "I didn't know," she whispered. "No," I said quietly. "You didn't. I could have rubbed it in right then. Could have said all the things that had been building up inside me since the moment she told me I wasn't welcome in her house anymore. But I didn't. I'd already said enough. The truth was sitting there on the table in front of us, plain as day, and that was all I needed. Rachel wiped her eyes quickly, glancing toward the fire. "So, what happens now?" she asked, voice small. I didn't answer right away. I sat there a while longer, watching the flames flicker, listening to the old house creak in the wind. Finally, I looked back at her and said, "That's up to you." Her eyes met mine, full of things she couldn't quite say yet. And I knew then, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But it wasn't broken beyond fixing either. The air inside that little house felt heavier than it had all morning. Rachel sat there at the table across from me, her eyes red and her hands clenched together like she was holding back a flood of words she didn't quite know how to say. I didn't push her. I wasn't in a hurry. I'd spent most of my life waiting for kids to get on the school bus, waiting for Mary to finish up in the garden, waiting for Rachel to figure out what kind of person she wanted to be. Waiting wasn't something that bothered me anymore. But this moment, this was different. There was a weight hanging between us now, thicker than all the snow piling up outside, and neither of us was sure what to do with it. Finally, Rachel spoke, her voice low and careful, like she was choosing each word one at a time. "Dad, I didn't come here just to say I was sorry. I need to ask you something." I leaned back in my chair a little, arms crossed, watching her without saying a word. I could see her fighting for the courage to finish her sentence. "I don't know if I deserve anything from you after everything," she went on, eyes flicking down toward the table. "But I need to know, did Mom really write that letter for me?" My jaw tightened just slightly. Out of everything she could have asked me, that was the one thing I wasn't ready to hear. I'd been holding on to that letter so long it felt like a part of me. Part of Mary, too. I'd thought about giving it to Rachel over the years, sure. But every time I got close, something inside me would say, "Not yet." And now it felt like maybe "not yet" wasn't an option anymore. Slowly I reached for the envelope again, opened it, and pulled out the letter. The paper had yellowed a little over time, but Mary's handwriting was still clear, still strong. I held it in my hand for a long second before sliding it across the table toward Rachel. "You read it," I said quietly. Rachel's fingers trembled as she picked it up, unfolding it slowly, carefully, like it was something fragile. Her eyes moved across the page, line by line, and as she read, I saw her face change. Her mouth opened just slightly, breath catching in her throat. And then, finally, the tears came. Not loud, not messy, just quiet tears rolling down her cheeks as she held the paper in both hands like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I didn't say anything. I just let her read. That's what Mary would have wanted. The house was silent, except for the crackle of the wood stove and the occasional creak of the wind against the walls. When Rachel finished, she folded the letter back up, set it down on the table, and looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time in years. "Why didn't you give this to me before?" she asked, voice breaking. I took a breath, feeling the answer settle somewhere deep in my chest before I let it out. "Because I wasn't sure you were ready to hear her," I said. "And maybe I wasn't ready to let her go." Rachel wiped her face quickly with the sleeve of her coat, pulling herself back together the way Mary always used to do when things got too heavy. I wish I'd known," she whispered. I didn't say it out loud, but in my head, the answer came easy. "Yeah, well, so do I. But wishing doesn't change much. Not at my age." After that, we sat in silence again. Not angry silence, just quiet. Like we were both feeling things too big to put into words all at once. Rachel's eyes kept flicking toward the envelope like she wanted to ask about the rest of it. The accounts, the deeds, the papers. But she didn't. Maybe she understood now that it wasn't about the money. Not really. After a while, she stood up, moving slow like her legs didn't want to carry her away just yet. "I should get back," she said, her voice still raw. "My kids. I need to check on them." I nodded, standing too, feeling my knees creak like old hinges. You got a good man looking after them? I asked, not out of spite, just curiosity. Rachel gave me a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. Yeah, James. He's a good father. Not always easy, but he tries. I followed her to the door, pulling it open so she could step out onto the porch again. The cold hit us both at once. Sharp, real, honest. Rachel turned back toward me, her hands stuffed in her coat pockets. "Dad," she said, voice soft, "thank you for not turning me away." I shrugged like it was no big thing, even though part of me knew it was. "That's what fathers do," I said simply. "We wait, even when we shouldn't have to." Rachel gave me one last look, then stepped down off the porch, her boots crunching through the snow as she walked back toward her SUV. I stood there watching until the engine roared to life and the taillights disappeared down the old gravel road. And once she was gone, I stepped back inside, closed the door behind me, and sat down at the table again. The envelope was still there, half open, papers inside just waiting. I reached for them one more time, but then I stopped. Something in me said, "Not yet, not yet. Some things even now need a little more time." The fire crackled beside me, warm and steady, and I sat there in that quiet little house thinking about all the things Mary had written down, thinking about Rachel, thinking about how sometimes, even after everything's been broken, there's still a way to put things back together again. The next morning, the sky was clear. No snow falling, no wind biting through the wood panels of the house. Just that cold, quiet Kansas stillness that makes a man feel like the whole world is holding its breath. I sat at the same kitchen table, cup of black coffee cooling in front of me, looking out the window toward the dirt road where Rachel's SUV had disappeared the day before. I'd stayed up most of the night, not sleeping much, just thinking. About Mary, about Rachel, about how far things had come, and about what still needed to be done. There was a kind of peace in the air, but also that edge of unfinished business. The kind that doesn't let a man just sit and let the fire burn down. After a while, I stood up, stretched my back until it popped like old floorboards, and picked up the envelope from the table one last time. I opened it carefully, laying out all the papers in front of me. The bank account summaries, property deeds, Mary's life insurance, everything I'd spent years tucking away in silence. I didn't feel angry looking at it anymore. Didn't feel bitter either. What I felt was something closer to clarity. The kind of quiet understanding that comes when a man finally accepts what's his to carry and what he's ready to set down. Around mid-morning, I grabbed my coat, slipped the envelope back into my bag, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was sharp but not cruel. There was something honest about it. I locked the door behind me, out of habit more than need, and started walking toward town. I wasn't in a hurry. A man like me doesn't rush for much these days, but I had something to take care of, and this time, I wasn't going to put it off any longer. By the time I reached Main Street, the town was just waking up. Stores opening, folks scraping frost off windshields, a couple of old-timers sitting outside the diner with their coffee cups steaming in the cold air. I gave them both a nod as I passed, and one of them tipped his hat, recognizing me from the old days. Small towns don't forget completely. They just get quiet for a while. My first stop was the bank. Same place I'd been using for years. The inside smelled like floor polish and coffee, and the same lady behind the counter was there, Mrs. Jenkins, white hair pinned back, glasses perched on her nose like they always were. She looked up as I walked in, her face lighting up in that way folks do when they see someone they didn't expect. "Walter Thompson," she said, voice warm. "It's been a while." "Sure has," I said, stepping up to the counter. "Got some things I need to take care of today." I laid the envelope on the counter, opened it slow, and pulled out the papers. I didn't explain everything. Didn't need to. Mrs. Jenkins had been working that desk long enough to know when a man meant business without needing all the details. We spent the next hour going over everything, transfers, signatures, authorizations. I made it clear that everything was staying in my name. No power of attorney for Rachel. No shared accounts. If she ever needed something from me again, it was going to be face-to-face, not through some sneaky paperwork behind my back. Once that was done, I stepped back out into the cold, envelope a little lighter now, but my chest heavier in a good way. Like I'd finally tied off a loose end that had been flapping in the wind too long. My next stop wasn't planned. I just found my feet walking toward it before I even realized where I was headed. It was Rachel's house, the big one with white columns, the one she and her husband had built after they moved back from the city. I stood out front for a long minute, looking up at it. The kind of house that says you've made it, even if you're not really happy inside. I wasn't there to knock. I wasn't there to hand her back the papers. I just wanted to see it one last time. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of something that stopped me. Rachel standing at the window watching me. She wasn't smiling, wasn't waving, just standing there, her hand resting on the glass. And that was enough. I tipped my head once, just enough for her to see, then turned and walked away. By the time I got back to my little house, the sun was starting to dip low, turning the sky that soft winter orange. I built up the fire again, poured myself another cup of coffee and sat back down at the table. Same spot as always. And as I sat there, looking around at that quiet, worn-in room, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the kind you get from forgetting everything that's gone wrong, the kind you earn by living through it. I don't know how many people out there listening to this have been through something like what I went through. Maybe your kids turned away from you. Maybe somebody forgot you when you needed them most. Maybe you've spent years holding on to something you weren't ready to share yet. But if you have, I want you to remember one thing. Your story ain't over until you decide it is. That's what I learned. We spend so much of our lives waiting for someone else to say sorry, waiting for someone else to make things right. But sometimes you've got to stand up, take what's yours, and keep moving forward with your head held high. That envelope, it wasn't just about money or property. It was about knowing I'd done right by myself, by Mary, by the life we'd built. And if Rachel ever truly wants to be part of that again, well, now she knows where to find me. And now she knows exactly who her old man really is. If you've listened all the way through my story, I want to thank you. Truly. Not everyone gets to tell their side. And I also want to say something important before I go. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, if you've been through something like this or know someone who has, leave a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your story too. And if you want to help this channel keep telling stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe and share this video. Every day there's a new story waiting to be told. And who knows? Maybe one of them will be yours. Thank you for listening. This is Walter Thompson signing off.